All right, everyone, welcome to Around the Coin. This episode, we talked about BalancedPayments, who closed up shop and passed their customers on to Stripe in a very respectful fashion. Just all the credit in the world to that team. I'm sure they'll come out and do something amazing in the future as well. We moved on to Apple Watch, kind of gave some high-level predictions there, discussed what the announcements were, particularly around the $17,000 band. We moved on to Square Order. Brian, from the start, had called this to be a failure by Square, and it turns out it was. They ended up closing up shop, and we sort of discussed the details around that. Then Brian and Faisal particularly nerded out around the IBM blockchain announcement and what that means to have instantaneous ACH transfers for the world, which I can tell you from our business at Home Hero would be huge, as opposed to waiting the 2 to 3 days standard to send money between bank accounts. Lastly, we gave predictions on the $116 million that was invested into Startup 21. Startup 21 is the name of this stealth startup that Andreessen Horowitz and RRE Ventures, among others, contributed their Series B in a pre-launch stealth startup, which is uncommon these days. And if you look at track record, not too successful. So we gave our predictions there. Of course, if you have any comments or requests, please do not hesitate to reach out. We'd love to get people involved and hope you enjoy. Thanks. All right, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Around the Coin. We have the three amigos back for episode 55. Before we get the show started, we want to give a big shout out to a donor of ours, someone who contributed the largest amount that we've had thus far, John Packle. So thank you, John. We really appreciate the support.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
It goes a long way.
Go, John.
It invigorates us, fuels our fire.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we are fired up today.
Yeah, we sure are. We've been doing a lot of work on how to revamp Around the Coin 2.0, and come April 1, we're going to have a big announcement there. So our checklist today, we have, first of all, how are you guys doing? Faisal, Brian, have a good week. I missed you guys last week.
Wonderful. Missed you. How was that bike ride to San Diego?
Yeah. First of all, Brian thought I ran the pre-show. Brian thought I ran from Los Angeles to San Diego, but biked is about 150 miles. Is absolutely beautiful day with a couple friends. It was fantastic. So
how long did it take, by the way?
It was just over 8 hours. It
Wow.
was, yeah.
Wow.
It was just about sunset to sundown, if you include stoppage time.
Now, Mike, will you do that with the dribbling effect? At some
if
point?
I was, Brian's alluding to the fact that I attempted,
World Record guy.
broke the marathon while dribbling a basketball. No, definitely not.
You did break the record, right?
I missed it by 2 seconds.
No, he missed it by a couple of seconds.
Yeah, literally 2 seconds.
Next time.
And then a guy from Estonia broke it by a few minutes. So now I've kind of.
That's a big watermark there.
Yeah. So, but yeah, things are good.
Very good.
You want to jump right into it?
Let me ask you, Brian, our good friend Mateen Tamizi, who came on to the show, who was our very first guest on Around the Coin, of CEO of BalancedPayments, he just put up a notice on their blog site that they were shutting down. Your thoughts?
Well, first off, what an amazing company. All right. We were honored to have him and talk about the company, the first guest, and really laser focused. Here I was trying to lead them down different streets in the conversation, saying, what about this? What about that? But they focused and they did exceedingly well. And, payments, in the 30 years I've been in this industry and watching it directly and indirectly, I can tell you it is one of the most competitively difficult industries there is on the planet. There is nothing closer, and I've studied this. And to keep your pencil sharp is a tremendously tough task. And I think these guys gave it a great shot. Now, the important thing to understand is they really were not missing the mark. They were doing quite well. The thing is, they didn't achieve what we commonly know as escape velocity, and that is getting to the next level where there's maybe another funding event, maybe there's another direction. There were perhaps opportunities for mergings and other types of things that were on the forefront. But I think the founders came to this decision. And it was a decision that really blew me away. And that was probably the classiest thing I've ever seen in payments and probably in business in quite a long time. You have two founders who got together, two competitors, and very, very tough competitors, respectful but tough. You have Patrick over at Stripe and his brother, John, and Martin get together and say, I'm closing down Balanced. What can we do? And they put their heads together and they created a transition plan that would have zero impact on its merchants. And to me, that is amazing because a lot of times payment companies, when they shut the door, you wake up one morning, you don't have payments running. This has happened before. It's sometimes it get maybe 2 or 3 weeks notice. But, it was done in a very, very, respectful.
Graceful manner. Yeah.
Graceful.
I would say so.
And Patrick extended out on Twitter and certainly amongst the people in the industry, extended not only condolences, but his really deep, heartfelt respect for what the company did, how it achieved its success, how it helped define Stripe and Balanced, and how much character and quality that came out of the company. So it was a great moment for a sad event.
So I have a question to ask you. So one of the things that many people sort of know and don't know is Balanced customers, how will they be transitioning out to Stripe? And what do you think, considering especially the fact that Stripe does not offer ACH and Balanced does? So how will that affect them?
My understanding is that aspect is going to be open. I don't know if it's going to be open past October.
I think that's the agreement is they run for 6 months. And after that, you basically either Stripe has built it by that time or they go to some other provider.
Yeah, it caught everybody by surprise. So I don't think Stripe necessarily wanted to announce at a potentially bad circumstance that, hey, now we offer this. But I would have to say that if there's enough customers using that element of balance and there's more people coming along, that it would behoove Stripe to move into that direction. But, the APIs are still going to run. The servers are still going to have, activity. And ultimately, my understanding is they will continue to let a lot of these APIs run under Stripe's tutelage. So it's interesting.
So let me ask you, these are questions maybe a general audience might have, but why would is Stripe paying Balanced? Number one, is Stripe acquiring Balanced or any sort of sense, or is Stripe paying large amounts for their users? Did Stripe call up them and say, hey, can we buy all your customers from you? Or is this, Faisal, you gave me an interesting perspective a few days ago, or is this inevitable? Does it have to happen to where the customers win and there's a seamless transition? Because a lot of companies will just close up shop and say, sorry, we're just not going to be around, and you can find another provider if you want. It's kind of...
No, my opinion is that most likely it's a transition. They're saying, listen, in the end, we don't want our customers to lose out. So take the customers, just make sure that you take good care of them. We have our issues on our end, we'll handle them. But the customers, is what drives the company. Take them over so we can deal with our issues and, gracefully shut down and exit the business without leaving the customers high and dry.
Yeah. Why Stripe? There could have been other providers. They could have gone to.
It could have been, it
could have been PayPal.
It could have been Braintree. Yeah, it could have been, WePay. The same answer you would have asked. Then I guess they just went to. I guess maybe, I don't know. It's very difficult to. We have no a priori information on this thing, so it'd just be a guess. But I think he just chose one. Mental capacity, mental compatibility.
I think the compatibility angle is important, and I don't know if it'll ever be released.
The product is better. People would be happier with Stripe than PayPal. That's just a fact.
Yeah, so I think it'd probably never be released if there was any marginal exchange of finance, et cetera. I don't think anybody's calling this an acquisition or a merger, and I think people are kind of going out of the way to sort of put that fence up. So, maybe there was something that was taking place. Certainly, you have founders and some of the programmers who are going to stay on for 6 months. I'm sure that. That's being covered in all this. So, at the end of the day, it wasn't an exit. It certainly wasn't an exit that the investors were looking for. And, they had some great investors.
It happens in the banking industry a lot. Small banks,
all the
when
time.
they say, they can't handle, they're going into losses. The FDIC steps in, or the federal regulator, the OCC, et cetera, steps in, and they says, either you put the capital up, or if you don't have the capital, you have to back up. And then, needless to say, the next question is, well, what happens to my customers? So the FDIC, or whomsoever is, handling this situation, will say, okay, we'll bring in some like-minded banks for you to work with, larger banks who will acquire your customer base, because the FDIC steps in here because it is a federally deposited insurance for the bank, and they need to make sure that the deposits go to a more stable organization, so they help the transitioning. But that's just the deposits going to the other bank. The fact that the bank is in trouble and they may have debt, or other issues to solve and resolve, those will still be there, but they're handled differently. So they essentially sort of bifurcate the problem, solve one element of it, and the other element really doesn't affect the customers per se.
Faisal, you're not even far off exactly some of the circumstances that surround this type of event. I don't want to specifically talk to this event, but basically you have an acquiring bank that is sponsoring companies like Balanced and Stripe into the payment card industry. Those acquiring banks are 100% liable for any action by the sponsored entity. Now, when you're doing aggregated merchant accounts, where essentially you're the merchant of record, as Stripe was and as Balance was, there's deposit requirements that are mandatory, audit requirements that are mandatory, security requirements that are mandatory. It's quite onerous. And at the end of the day, when you're praying to two gods, Visa and MasterCard essentially, and you're reselling their payment services, and you have to try to mark that up and make profit from essentially the transaction, I can tell you there is absolutely 100% no long-term viable business plan from that. The Stripes, Squares, PayPals of the world ultimately will come to this conclusion if they don't already. Now, you might say value add. Well, yeah, a lot of times, what a lot of these companies think about is you look at it after the fact and you say, our biggest mistake was getting involved in payment processing. Our best idea was to build this great API or this great software.
Just value add on top of it, not be a pipe.
Exactly, because there's so much time and money. And I think if Square were to be started today, I'm 90% sure they would not process a single credit card.
You couldn't say that, because the reason Square was their whole catalyst for existence was the credit card swiping on the phone, right? And that's not really an issue now.
No, hold on. That's not the part I'm talking about. They would have the dongle, they would have the card reader, they would have the app, they would have the fixed pricing model, but they would not be processing the payment card. An acquiring bank or a network would be doing that. They would offload the part that makes very little money. No matter how many times you hear people saying that there's money to be made at the fixed rates that they're doing, unfortunately, it's an exaggeration is the best way I can term it.
But Brian and Mike, I'll tell you one thing. I cannot think of an example where a payment company, that was processing cards, etc., just went bust. I can think of many examples of where payment companies were acquired by the larger companies. So in many ways, this could essentially be mimicking probably the same thing, but circumstances are slightly different.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the biggest, a quick aside here, one of the biggest failures in the payments industry was Bank of Beverly, and the Las Vegas bank also to a certain extent. Bank of Beverly was a massive payment processing bank outside of most people's era here. Late 80s, early 90s, they did a lot of the adult and a lot of internet high-risk business. And they had incredible management systems. They would make some of the management systems we have today for risk actually look amateur. They had advanced systems that still are not being implemented. They did exceedingly well. They also had a great connection to Las Vegas, so that there's always this Las Vegas connection with a lot of these high-risk entities. They got shut down by bank regulators, primarily because they were doing too well. There was a massive amount of money. The problem was the shutdown was so fast, and the overall feeling from the regulators were they were not, upstanding merchants to their standards at that point. they just said, shut it off. And they literally unplugged things, and they literally left merchants high and dry. Now, that caused a massive problem in a number of different sectors. Early internet companies woke up one morning and they weren't able to get processing. And back then, every time you mentioned internet in a payment processing application, it would automatically be stamped high risk and be declined by most banks. Period. That was it. It's just like saying Bitcoin today on any type of banking application.
Well, I think the walkaway is that, Stripe and Braintree did a good thing.
So much respect.
Good handshake. Yeah,
so
good
much
handshake.
Respect for these guys.
And
so much respect.
And I'm glad both companies were thinking about the clients. So it's a win for the clients, I say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll all personally be, if you can't beat them, join them.
We have not heard the last from the team. The teams that put this together. I think we're going to see great things coming.
So we have the release of Apple Watch, which I haven't been on the show since that's happened. I'm sure you guys mentioned that last week. And Brian, what is give us the bullet points here?
Well,
no surprises. They didn't discuss any app payments.
Yeah, it was a very toned down event. I would say that just like most Apple events, they finally tune it at the very last minute, sometimes up into the last 3 or 4 hours. And a lot of it has to do with what people are feeling up until the very last. Like certain apps that were going to be demoed. I knew of 2 apps that were supposed to be demoed that did not get demoed. I don't know why. You may never find out why.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting where the CEO Tim Cook goes up and he announces the $17,000. He's like, here's the Apple Watch and here's the price points, and then he's like, we have one for $17,000. And they just cut right to the next thing.
Yeah.
That was one thing I thought was interesting. It's so un-Apple-esque. It feels kind of like
It felt wrong.
It feels. I feel like he's kind of against that. Whoever decided that this needs to be built, or I feel like there was some politics behind that decision because it's so. It feels conniving, right?
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that $17,000 or $10,000 watch, whatever it is, I think it's going to become a huge success.
It's going to sell out.
I think there's a huge market. Yeah, because today, what you could be wearing a Vacheron Constantine, a fantastic watch, or a Jägerli Coulter, what have you. One of my favorites, by the way. But it is a singular function device. It doesn't communicate with anyone else except the person who's looking at it, and that's even passive communication. So I think a gold one with that has multiple functions. I think that's the way that's the way we are heading, and that's the way the watch will be. The watch that we've known for how many years? Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years.
It's no more.
Yeah. It's funny. The professor at NYU. A marketing professor, brilliant guy. I'll try to get the video. He said in a quote, and he's absolutely right, and this really polarizes people, but we are human beings. It says, my watch tells the opposite sex, if you're in this direction, that I'm broadcasting my viability to take care of your kids. Meaning if I'm a guy wearing a certain watch, I'm broadcasting to you in some very guttural way that I can be a great provider. And the reality is...
spend all my money on a watch and not pay for college.
Yeah, but there's a caveat. But there's a caveat to that statement. The sleeve has to be short.
Yeah. But, the other thing is, let's face it, the person that's going to be sporting a watch, the edition version of Apple Watch, there's a lot of my friends call it the jerk factor effect, that if you get a watch like that, there's a good chance the person who's going to sport it in public is trying to make some statement. Now, you could be a rap star and make some statement. You would hang it around your neck then on a chain, make sure it's very clear. Or, you can wear it around your ankle maybe. I don't know. The bottom line is, this is a new realm for even Apple. And I think this is what we're seeing in Tim Cook is he's surrounded himself with some of the most amazing minds in high-end retail.
I think that's what it is. Apple. This is not an Apple decision. This is coming from the DNA of someone who has been in retail for a number of years. Give the super high-end clients a way to to join the club, right? You give them a VIP entrance. That's what it is.
It is.
So,
it is express yourself. And it's unlike Apple's DNA. They've always been the more expensive product, but within a realm of reality.
Affordability, yeah. It's a stretch for most people.
There's going to be good profitability here, perhaps great profitability. They're going to, I was looking at some numbers from a couple of analysts, and they were so excited. They couldn't even hold back to their excitement as to the number of watches they will sell. They're anticipating on the very, very pessimistic low side, 12 million watches. On a very high and, let's say very optimistic side, 18 million watches. If you do 12 million watches at $399, you do the math.
Yeah, it's
right?
insane.
And no watch and by the way, all the top 10 watch companies put together will not equal the revenue of what these guys will do.
We'll see
if
when
they
do
even
it.
achieve 10 million.
Yeah. There's a great video from one of the founders of Swatch, the actual company that made the plastic watches, because the Swatch organization is actually a sort of a co-op, if you will, of Swiss watchmakers. He said that his prediction at first was 100% inaccurate. He said it won't go anywhere. He said his prediction today is that this is going to completely decimate the entire watch industry from this point on.
Well, we'll see.
Look at Pebble. Look at Pebble 2. Pebble 2 did what, 75,000? Maybe now it's 80,000 watches. Yeah. These guys will kill that probably from 2 stores in a day,
Yeah, and the thing about it is, we got to understand that today the killer app for the watch has not been announced. All right, we don't know what that is. I know that there's some tent poles there. One of the tent poles is notifications. What and how we view notifications in the future is going to change because of watch. It will influence other forms of media distribution and delivery, like a computer and like an iPhone. But it's going to have its own unique thing. And at some future date, we'll be able to make sense of why it made sense, but not today. Payments is going to be a big thing. The fact is, you don't need your iPhone around to pay for something. And that's a big thing.
Let me ask you another question. Do you think people will hold back until version 2 comes out?
Yes.
Yes and no. Yes and no.
I think it'll be the same effect as the iPad, right? You have early adopters buying
iPhone
it
too, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you get the same distribution of early adopters.
Yeah, the early adopters, there's some people are going to get it just because they have to have it because of being in the business. There's some people going to get it because they're collectors. They're first in lines. But let's face the fact, it's going to be thinner and slicker in version 2. All right. The thing is bigger and more bulkier than it needs to be. I'm not saying that was a preconceived notion, but I can tell you the next version is going to be more curvy.
It also needs to not connect to your phone.
Rolex is thick,
Yeah, but it's thick in some ways because of the amount of metal that's being used on purpose, So
$17,000 worth.
Yeah, but the thing we have to remember about Apple Watch is it's not a mechanical device; it's an electronic device. And we're in this new realm. What is the collector's value of an antiquated electronic device? Now, it will boot up. It's not like it needs a disk drive or something. It'll turn on. But at some future date, it's not going to sync with anything. 20 years from now, your iPhone is long going to be gone. Bluetooth is no longer going to be used, and every other element. So it might be a walled garden upon itself at some future collector value date. So that's going to be interesting. I don't know how that's going to play out.
We'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. So next topic we have Square Order, the booming business of Square Order. For some reason, they decided to shut it down. I think this one.
Who predicted that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Brian thought this was going to be the huge business of Square.
Yeah, I was so strong about it. Yeah. Let me tell you, Square Wallet or Pay with Your Name, I thought was an incredible idea. It wasn't an idea invented by Square. It was around before that, but they really built, I think, the most compelling infrastructure around it. The problem was there's about 25 points in my early research that needed to be addressed immediately. I went around aggressively to try to urge this. I said, do some empirical work. Go out in the field. Don't just do this in the ivory tower. It sounds great. It's cool for your friends, but it can't scale. And here's how we can get it to scale. It didn't happen. So ultimately, from a a user experience and user interface standpoint, it was destined to fail. But there was more. It is a chicken or egg problem. What comes first? Does the consumer or the merchant? Well, in reality, in payments, it will never be the consumer first. You literally have to convince a merchant to have the infrastructure. And maybe simultaneously, but probably not, you can build the consumer side. This was Square trying very hard to get on both sides of the transaction.
Well, it actually makes, you have to have the supply side first, right?
Yeah, but they were trying to build demand on the consumer side to urge merchants to adopt it. And that was not a good idea. That was to try to use social pressure. They were sending, they literally hired college kids. I forget what they called them, promoters. They hired college kids to go out to merchants and to say, I'd come into your sub shop if you would use Pay with Square. And it not only galvanized those merchants against Square, it made them really think about, why would I get my entire payment system changed over just because one kid who maybe I've never seen.
I can say from someone who's built a startup for 2 years working on mobile ordering with FlowTab, I think it's impossible to believe. It blows my mind that someone at Square, enough so they dumped $15 million and 15 engineers for a year, that they thought they had some advantage over anyone else, right? And this is not their core DNA. This is like Amazon building Amazon Fresh with trucks versus Instacart, which has a fleet of people that they've onboarded, right? It's just the wrong model. And I think it's not in their DNA, and they were foolish to continue to go down this road. What almost makes me wonder, when you walk into a merchant, it doesn't matter if you're Square or if you're FlowTab, right? It's all about who you are and what you can discuss with that person.
That's right.
But it blows my mind they continued for so long, right? Like, why?
Well, I have to say this. That there's complacency. There's the challenge of it all. There's the opportunity. You say, well, it is ripe. I'm going to do it. If I put my mind to it, it can be done, et cetera, and you become complacent and not really. In hindsight, it's very easy to say this, but I guess at that moment in time, it does seem like a challenge. It does seem like that this could be broken into.
I gotta agree, guys, but I was early on in this trying to say, listen, you have the seed of a great idea, but you cannot take this seed and put it out in the desert and not give it water and sunlight. Without the proper research, without the proper experience behind it, it's going to utterly fail. And it utterly failed. We're talking about when we look at when Square finally becomes an open book about its finances, we're going to look at the money pit that this created within the company. But not only just a money pit, the mental anguish side of this is massive. There were teams and teams of people. This wasn't a side project for Square. They had, at one point, 25, 30% of its engineer leadership behind this project. So they took what one precious thing we don't get. They took time and they wasted it for almost 2 years, not a few months, on something that never really got close to taking off. And then when it finally failed, and it failed for one reason, somebody finally woke up at Square and knew that Apple Pay was coming. And they said, we don't necessarily compete with Apple Pay. They said this. Of course they do. It's a form of a wallet.
Right.
Square
you can use one or the other. You can't use both.
One or the other. You can't use both. Right. And so we better shut this down. So 2 months before Apple Pay came out, they shut it down unceremoniously. And heartbreaking to a lot of the merchants who were, in fact, using it. Not a lot, but they just shut them off. They said, now we're going to have no more apps, but you could still use it, but it's a dead end. And by the way, we learned a lot by Square Pay with your name and Square Wallet. We now have Square Order or Order Ahead. They kept changing the name. And this is more apropos to the cafe and the coffee shops and the food businesses. And look you're already using forms of this. It's what people really love about Square. And they triumphed this. They had the media really, really, beat it up as this is the new Square wallet. This is going to exist on into the future. Well, the problem was the same premise was there. They did not deal with the lack of research and lack of experience and how merchants really utilize these things. and it had zero adoption. And at the same time, they acquire Caviar, right? They get themselves so far off the farm. They're a payments company, period. All this other operating system for businesses, beautiful thought. They built themselves primarily around payments, and unfortunately, they're locked to that. That's not a bad thing. It's just a self-realization thing that really needs to be dealt with. But becoming a food delivery service company is an order of magnitude more of a not wise choice.
So they spent, it said reported $90 million in stock. So if that's the real price that they paid, this is over $100 million operation.
Yeah.
That blows my. I mean, look
up against. Mike, you know the sector. Who is Caviar up against? What public companies?
You have not public, but hugely successful, right?
And private.
I mean, you have
Grubhub.
Grubhub,
right?
Seamless, Postmates, DoorDash. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Is that not an aggressive area to be in?
It just blows my mind to think what is your key advantage over these guys, right? What is your moat? And
there isn't any.
Man, I don't know. I wonder if they had to spend the cash, if they had it and they had to have a project. And this just happened to be the best one.
And don't get me wrong. Caviar as an idea, just like Square Wallet, just like all these things, nobody's baby is ugly. It's beautiful. But then we have to take it out into the real world and say, okay, you're going to have to deal with the real merchant. Now, the real merchant is getting hit by all the companies you've just mentioned, Mike, but more. For every one company there is in food delivery, there's 25 local companies that are doing it old school and making a lot of money. Just go, you're up in LA, go and look at those racks in front of these businesses. How many booklets are there? And you want to know something? You go and you audit those, which, by the way, I've done for the last 5 years. I can tell you exactly how many booklets leave those racks. And I can pretty much tell you, within an accuracy of about 3%, how many of those booklets are actually being used. So a typical rack in front of a California pizza kitchen in Beverly Hills, California, right? That rack can hold just about 70 books. These are little booklets that are menus for you to order. It takes about a week for 70 of those books to be gone in Beverly Hills. And of those 70 books, about 25 are used. So these are new acquisition targets. Now, you're competing with local entrenched delivery services where a vast majority of people have no pain point of picking up a phone and saying, yeah, give me 2 pizzas. Here's my name. Yeah. Thank you. Right?
Yeah, no, true.
Let's face it. All right. So here we are, and you acquire Caviar. Brilliant individuals, great engineers, solving a problem that may or may not exist. I would assert it does not exist. So we go from Square Wallet, which could have been saved. I still argue, give me the Square Wallet. I'll do it for free. I can make that thing scale. The problem is you're scaling it the wrong way. Square Order, which is a watered down version of Square Wallet, which really didn't have a true purpose. And then you jump into Caviar, which is an ordering system and a delivery system. And it's not even understanding how Uber and Postmates are changing this entire paradigm. And I'm sure, Mike, you know yourself, how can you go up against those two companies alone? I mean, Postmates is a rocket
it's tough,
rider.
Man. I don't know. I don't really see it. Maybe in hindsight, this is a different perspective, but it seems like a tough move. So I guess we're not going to be seeing Square IPO anytime soon. Brian, let me ask you, what do you feel about the engineers? Give me a little sense of that passion before the show. I mean, it felt like those guys, if they're working so long every day, I don't know.
Mike, I have a lot of friends at Square. A lot of them just reach out to me. A lot of them are engineers, young and very idealistic and very gung-ho about their projects. Now, it's very easy for us in our station in life to have judgment about how glorified somebody might be about a company or a project. But these individuals dedicate not just a cursory 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day, getting a massage and then hitting the cafeteria or whatever. These guys are working sometimes 18 to 20 hours a day. They're sleeping on floors. They're living in $4,000 or $5,000 a month apartments with 6 or 7 other guys, and it's not like they're slave labor in a sense. They're not making money, but mentally they've given themselves over to these projects. and you wake up one day and you're just believing that this is going to change the world because you've drank the Kool-Aid. And let me tell you, at 22 years old or 21 or 23, and really focused in on engineering and technology.
You see all these success stories around you. The guys working there have had previous successes, so it's not really
money.
Easy.
Yeah, it's not money.
Yeah.
It's this glory of wanting to do something great, to make cool things. And that, I hope, never stops. Then you wake up another day and you realize that everything you built, everything you made, has just been turned off. It's done. Now, there is a burnout. And I don't want to be specific, but I know of dozens of engineers that probably will never code to the level they did before they got burnt out on these types of projects. It breaks my heart.
We'll see how that plays out. But Faisal, why don't you take the lead on this one? IBM blockchain, I thought, was a really interesting topic. Maybe just explain in layman's terms why this is significant for everything.
Well, for first, it's various central banks of the world have expressed interest in the blockchain or Bitcoin technology, whether directly or not, or indirectly, or maybe even commenting on a specific aspect of it, but they've done so. The two most notable ones are obviously the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. They have actually put out papers and publications that the blockchain is something that is going to change how banking can be done. Because many people don't know the actual ledger system today, how banks actually move value and wealth amongst different banks, amongst different countries, is actually on a ledger system. It is, if you look at it and study it, it is a ledger system. It very much mimics a blockchain, except that it's private. It's centralized, it's controlled, and it does various different mechanisms. Doesn't do Bitcoin, but the fact that IBM went and started talking to all the banks and saying, listen, we can now, if you were to allow us, we would implement the blockchain technology for you. It would allow you to rid yourself, and this is very important, rid yourself of a third-party outsourced switch that would handle transactions on your behalf. And we can actually allow you to do instantaneous transactions, payments within your country for your currency. And also, because there's the blockchain ledger, you can also start, talking to other banks, other central banks. So it has a huge impact if IBM can pull it off. There's going to be a question on monopoly and all that stuff. Is it going to be an IBM standard? Is it going to be an open standard? Is it going to be maybe even a Ripple fork? Who knows? No one knows for now. They're not talking much about it. But the fact that, IBM has initiated this thing, they've taken it forward, they could very well be the front runners in something like this, have access to almost all the central banks. If they can convince, for example, the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, in Basel, Switzerland, and all the BIS members to implement this thing, even on an experimental basis, you could have an ecosystem where real-time transactions by consumers, not just banks, but by consumers, initiated instantly, settled, all the ledger handling, accounting would be done instantaneously, and have a very seamless global network for payments. What would this spell out for SWIFT? I don't know, but nonetheless, a great initiative. Just needs to be seen which direction it'll go.
Faisal, what's your feeling on? Does it have to be either or? I mean, does it have to be either SWIFT or what IBM is coming in, or is it going to be maybe a freeway next to maybe a kind of a thoroughfare?
Well, so SWIFT is already in all the banks. What if I tell you that tomorrow SWIFT says, okay, hey guys, you want blockchain? We're turning it on.
Well, that means that might mean IBM, right? So it might.
Well, hold on.
Why not just use what IBM has?
So what is a blockchain? It's just an open ledger, right?
Exactly.
But it's a ledger in a very cool way. Banks are already using it. How do you think money actually gets transferred from country A to country B? It's the same concept. They already have a ledger system, except the fact that the reconciliation.
It's not a public.
No. Obviously, it can't be public, because then obviously you'll have access to money. You can create wealth into it. but it is a private ledger, but it uses its own protocol. What they are seeing with the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin technology and the forks of Bitcoin and the other altcoins that have come out are some things that they had not considered before. The double spend issue, et cetera, being able to decentralize the whole thing, have very good redundancy checks and mechanisms and so forth. I think that's where they really see the value. But a company like Swift, really could partner up with, I don't know if this is even the right to say it, but they could actually go and say, listen, hey, we're going to implement Stellar, or we're going to implement a Hyperledger or Ripple, or even Bitcoin. I don't think so Bitcoin would work, but let's say, a fork of the Bitcoin.
Sure.
And then suddenly IBM would be left out because Swift is already there. It's there with all the banks who do international transmission. But IBM has approached it slightly better. They're saying, listen, we're not bringing it. Well, they haven't said it yet, but they're not bringing it for international settlements. They're bringing it for domestic payment systems. They really say that, when somebody, and I quote unquote over here, when somebody wants to transact in the system, instead you're trying to acquire Bitcoins, you simply say, here are some US dollars, and it gets sorted out within it. The ability for them to, for consumers to go and use a system that is directly connected to the central bank has never been offered before. It's a very important point. There are always banks and intermediaries in between. Usually, intermediary companies, like Faster Payments in the UK, which is obviously controlled by the banks and so forth, but third entities nonetheless.
So, Faisal, does this make you go long on Bitcoin again? Is there, if it doesn't make an impact, are there other things that you would look for in?
Well, I think I'm always long on Bitcoin. I'm always long on Bitcoin. I have issues with Bitcoin because of the fact that it's Bitcoin only. I have issues with the fact that the ledgers are going to go explode once you introduce them to the public. I mean, each and every, the blockchain is just going to become so huge, it's impossible to maintain it. Only some very large data centers would be able to maintain it. So then how do you manage it? So this is where I'm certainly against the principle of mining something. Bitcoin has a different thing. I mean, but mining something, if it was already pre-mined like Ripple or Stellar or anything else, everyone agrees it's not Bitcoin. It's the blockchain that's the winner here.
Well, I would have to digress here just a bit about mining. Mining
you can say disagree.
Well, let's look at it this way. Mining is actually knitting together the blockchain. And I love the idea that the fact that you can take the largest computing power on the planet right now is the Bitcoin mining activity.
It is, yeah.
There is no way that you could have put that much power together unless you had a financial incentive. Now, to a neophyte, they'd look at this and saying, wow, these are people that are just manufacturing money. It's no different than going and mining into a mountain and finding any other thing of value.
But
they're putting something value. They're putting value together because there would be no Bitcoin blockchain.
No, that's fine. For the libertarians and all the open source and all that stuff, it's a great thing.
Well, no, it's beyond that. Who's going to own the all right? No. The problem with Ripple is who's going to own the blockchain. Who owns it?
Listen, for fiat purposes,
Sure.
and I strictly say the word, for fiat purposes, Bitcoin blockchain is not good enough.
Oh, yeah, I would agree that. I mean, this is version beta 1.2. I mean, Bitcoin is not the ultimate end all be all. You mentioned one very large issue, and there's solutions, and that is the ledger is going to get unwieldy, incredibly complex, and it's already there, and it's basically marginal at this point. But the premise of having individuals stitch together what we're calling a blockchain or an open ledger, I think that is the revolution that is behind Bitcoin. And when one pre-mines a coin and they're asking a central authority, somebody who owns the computer or the network, or maybe two or three of them, to do all this work, now you're kind of taking away the guts of what really made Bitcoin so phenomenal. That's not really the libertarian or the wild aspect of Bitcoin. It's actually the most logical thing about Bitcoin, because the decentralization and the ability for anybody to jump in here and to utilize what was at one point free computer cycles. Now it's becoming, this huge, arms race of who can get bigger and bigger factories.
Well, take a step back.
Sure.
Look at companies like Jack Henry or Fiserv
or
Temenos or Mises and all the other technology companies, even Oracle for that matter. They were never in the business of saying, listen, guys, how can we enable value transfer on the internet? How can we enable the double spend? How can we, avoid the double spend? How can we make it decentralized? All these things came, but now I feel that they cannot ignore it. They cannot ignore the technological breakthroughs that have come because of Bitcoin. However, at the same time, they cannot ignore the regulated environment from which they are already earning. So they are saying, let's take the best of Bitcoin, juxtapose it onto the regulated entities we work with, and see how they could possibly benefit. And I think this is what I think this is what IBM is trying to do. They're saying, listen, we're not going to go and suddenly open money and everyone can create money. We're just going to make, we feel if you buy our servers, our services and so forth, we feel we can do a better blockchain concept for you as a country.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And IBM's entry into this is not exclusive of individual miners. It's not like this is going to be the only way. What they're essentially doing is they're opening up a platform and they're saying this is a transitionary path for you to get into let's call it a digital currency, right? It's going to be more than that. It's going to be a way of obviously ledgering things, but it could ultimately become a way that a central bank issues value, right? And there's no doubt it's going to happen. I mean, 20 years from now, this would be such an academic conversation because it's going to happen, right? There's no doubt. But the thing is how it's going to happen, whose technology. I happen to think that if you take, I think somebody did a calculation, Amazon AWS is probably one of the largest networks of computers at this point, certainly running a vast majority of websites.
And no one knows how big.
No one knows how big. It's a big black box, but it's doing really well. The current Bitcoin hashing power is an order of about 20 times more larger in actual computational power than what is currently going on in AWS. There is and by the way, if you were to take Visa and MasterCard's network and you were to try to distill it down into hashing capability, which is not a one-to-one, certainly Amazon's not a one-to-one, it's even many times more larger, those entities. I argue that you can't get that way without giving this sort of opportunity. And the people that build these networks lose nothing. They gain everything. It becomes a philosophical thing. And I watch people who are free minds.
No, let's take that word. It's a philosophical thing. I think this is where we need to look at it. This is not a technological thing.
Of course.
The fact that bankers are even, I mean, if you ask average bankers, and my God, I've had interaction with them, they have no clue as to what Bitcoin is.
Don't even say it, right?
And blockchain, I mean, puzzled look, right? But the fact that the top echelons of central banks are even willing to explore the blockchain protocol and the blockchain journalism, journaling mechanism, and so forth, is a fantastic start. It's a behavior change, like we've always been saying.
Yeah.
So I think IBM is leading behavior change. They don't know what they're going to sell. Well, maybe IBM already knows. IBM is pretty good at this thing.
Well, they invented the payment card, right? I mean, basically, it was. IBM that put it out there with no patents. No patents for the Mac.
So IBM is definitely going to go and say, listen, if I can do the behavior change, I've already in part of my IBM has something called SS7, the SSM, signature selling methodology, which is a 7-step process to sale. Sure. I think they've already crossed the first 2 if they already sort of convince the bankers to look at this technology, and then they can actually take the lead. IBM has a huge research center, modify the protocol, bring it into compliance, make it more powerful, make it more real-time for real-time payments directly. That's a huge undertaking, my friend, and in any manner.
So the question here, Faisal, from your worldview, where do you see IBM first taking, the seed taking hold? I mean, I don't think it's going to be the U.S., right? It's probably going to be a smaller country. Do you have any predictions where this might? Ecuador? Yeah.
Ecuador.
That would be interesting.
Ecuador came out with the first digital currency in parallel to its fiat currency.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Hey, who knows? Ecuador. Who knows? Argentina. IBM has access to countries you and I don't even think of.
I know.
Ghana. I don't know. It could be Vietnam. Could be Thailand. Could very well. I don't think so. It's ever going to be India. India is
no hope.
Is way advanced in IT, and I don't think so. They would say something like this, but they have access to a very large database of potential customers. They'd probably go to some banks or whatever. Maybe even Bank of England. Bank of England is pretty up there. Maybe even some of the Norcs, the Nordic companies, and start working with them. No one knows, but
But to the consumer, right? This is more background business to business. To the consumer, this translates pretty much into that fast movement of money that we were talking pre-show, right?
So, here's the thing. What are payments? The payments are transitioning from what we used to call, well, in the US, I'm sorry, you have my sympathies, but we used to call the 3-day payments to the 2-day payments to the 1-day payments. And here's the best part. They came to now what US is now debating, what is called faster payments, still be 1 day, or maybe a couple of times a day at least. The UK already has it, faster payments. So we are transitioning from 3-day payments, 2-day, 1 day, faster to what everyone is asking for, instant payments.
Instant, yeah.
Yeah. And so what's
we're
the impact to the average person, right? Is this going to change the entire remittances landscape?
Well, so there's one other aspect of it. When we say instant, we are still doing institutionalized instant. That means we are settling with our institution, which is settling with a counterparty institution, which is settling with the beneficiary. The goal is now to bring peer-to-peer, P2P, not person-to-person, peer-to-peer, beneficiary to sender to receiver directly and settle instantly.
Wow.
That is the fear that banks don't like because they get cut out of the process.
Well, they would still be there from a legal standpoint, right?
So they are the merchant on record, but the payment is still being done directly. So here's a question, a very interesting question. You ask a banker what P2P is, he'll never, ever say peer-to-peer. He'll say person-to-person.
Sure.
Peer-to-peer is totally different. That means you and I, and that's it. You and I. There's no you
person-to-person, just broader.
Person to person is, I'm going to go, I'm sending it to you, you're sending it to me, but we are going to do it through our respective institutions.
Now, Faisal, let's take this one step. We know that this is coming, right? What does that do to the landscape of the now legacy players, right? We have people in this, app, we Venmo and all, PayPal, et cetera. If this comes about and it can move quite quickly, what happens? I mean, are banks mediators to this? Or?
No, I think the legacy players, and let's talk about the legacy providers. I mean, Jack Henry, for example, is a name. If you were to just take a plane and hop outside the U.S., people would not know what you're talking about, even in banking circles.
Who's this guy, Jack?
Yeah, exactly. Jack,
I know.
Is he from the Federal Reserve or something? But likewise in the U.S., if you talk about Mises, you probably have never heard the word.
Exactly.
Or Terminos, however you pronounce it. So Terminos is the Jack Henry outside the U.S. Everywhere else in the world, it's Terminos, it's Mises.
Sure.
But people don't know about it. So these companies have immense influence into the banking world and sector. Cybos, for example, that happens every year, and the other events that happen, bankers get together. Whatever they will tell is how the direction would be driven. So you and I can scream all we want and saying, hey, you got to check the blockchain out. We got to go independent, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to happen. The bankers are paying attention to their very core banking system, the CBS vendors. And they will listen to what they will say. And because any changes in the core banking system takes months, if not years, to implement.
Yeah.
A core banking change
Yeah.
can take years, literally. And I think they're gonna cajole the central bankers, the policymakers, and drive it themselves. I do not think that they will have an independent voice.
Now, Mike, you're listening to us nerding out here. What do you see? I mean, what do you see from your perspective? Do you feel that this is going to materially impact you from a company standpoint? You're certainly you have a platform and you pay out to people. Do you see this as changing the way you see things?
I don't know. It's a stretch to believe that it would. For me, at least, it seems like it's such a not far-fetched, but it's still a stretch from reality to think that it makes a difference. I mean, these are people who are, I more think about it in terms of the cultural standpoint. People are sort of used to their typical ways to get paid. I guess it could be a tool that we somehow use, but frankly, just the payment flow now of credit card, we take it and then send direct ACH like all the other marketplaces, I think are fairly fixed. I think it would play a more impactful role in probably less marketplace type environments, more just peer-to-peer, as you mentioned, person-to-person payments, which are probably going to have new applications once it becomes a viable option for people.
So in your world, you're ACHing, and that's a 24-hour type of cycle, right? You started today, you batch file, it shows up tomorrow. Do you see that if you're able to ACH, let's use this new ACH term, right? Within 10 minutes, it shows up in their account. Would that make you
that would make a huge difference.
Gotcha.
And I think for a couple of reasons. One is there's always questionability between where's my money, right? It's always like, okay, we deposit it and now it's just floating in, ethos somewhere and it's going to get there soon. So that always creates a sense of like, it's just a shitty user experience to have to wait for that confirmation. And I think the other thing it does is it just delays the fact that people don't have access to their money. And now when people live on a month to month or frankly week to week or day to day basis, you need the money. And I think just the pure mechanics of being able to send someone money that they can use to do whatever they need to do faster is a huge advantage, particularly for us.
It's a classical Cuba Gooding Jr. phrase. Show me the money.
So Mike, can I ask, how often are you paying out in your marketplace? Is it weekly or daily?
We pay every day. So we send the request to Stripe to submit the ACH deposits every day. We tell the providers that there's 2 to 3 days of delay, and there are, depending on the bank and depending on how long it takes. And when we submit, Stripe processes at 2:00. So if we get our goal is to get all the submissions in by 2:00 for that day, so that they can get processed through the wire and hopefully get there within 24 to 2 days later.
Now, you don't know, right? You throw it over the wall. There's no feedback mechanism to say that somebody's received their money. So
there's not.
Right? That's the other pain point, right? Because you can say, I sent it.
The consolidation, pardon my French, is a bitch.
It is because, to me, I find that as being the biggest hole in ACH.
All Stripe does. Stripe gives us a confirmation that the money has been sent successfully, which theoretically that should be 100%. We should never send money and have it be successful and then have the bank not receive it. But what if the person put in the wrong banking routing number? What if they were looking at a check for their brother and they put in that one? We have no way of knowing that it was successful to that specific account.
Now, do you pre-note the account before, or you're just going by what they've entered in? Because a pre-note would establish a feedback mechanism.
Yeah, we don't, so we don't verify that account is valid until we actually make a submission.
Does Stripe have a pre-note API? Do they have a way of checking?
I don't think they do, but I'd have to check to be sure.
Yeah,
but if they do, we would.
That's the way we would check.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the old days, we would do, especially when it came to, when we're depositing, $250,000 of a merchant's, deposits, we would pre-note, and sometimes it'd take 4 or 5 days to get the amble on back. The faster way is to deposit random amounts, and then somebody keys that into an app or something. But that in and of itself is not a verification to the nth degree. Pre-note is a guarantee, meaning the bank is now on the liability loop. If you pre-noted and you save that, if money is deposited into a checking account, doesn't show up, when you throw it over the wall, it's that bank's problem. When you don't pre-note, you throw it over the wall and it's lost, it's okay. So
Yeah,
no, it's gone.
see, that'd be awesome. All right, so we're gonna have a quick. Or Faisal, why don't you take it?
No. I was just going to say, Mike, you were really interested and curious about this company called 21.
Oh boy.
21 relating to the 21 million bitcoins that will ever be produced. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting part about it is the $116 million they launched pre-launch or raised pre-launch, particularly from Andreessen Horowitz, right? I think in RRE Ventures, those guys, they carry a lot of weight of success. So especially if you combine the 116 million, I'd have to believe that this is not another Klinkle effect, right? That these are intelligent decisions that are being made with the promise of something huge coming out of it. And it's kept under super ambiguous wraps, right? This is a true stealth startup. And it just blows my mind that you can have a stealth startup at this scale, right? 116 million pre-launch.
It's unprecedented.
So if you had to guess, gentlemen, what would you guess? Mike, you first, Brian, then you.
Boy, it's they really haven't released much.
Wild guess.
Yeah, I would say it's building the tools that the market has now. So if you look at the U.S. market of NASDAQ, right, all the ability to have futures and options and all those features that make the U.S. stock market a viable and successful marketplace. I think the Bitcoin infrastructure doesn't yet have that for everyday people, right? I can't go out and I can't trade futures, and I can't. There's a ton of tools that are missing, and I think these guys are going to build those tools for people to get involved and actually make Bitcoin viable to buy and sell stocks on. And maybe we redefine what an IPO is and rethink where you can invest in companies. So I think they're building those tools. So
you're saying this is an exchange?
I don't think it's an exchange. I think it's tools built on the Bitcoin. I think there'll be an exchange. Whether or not they're building an exchange.
A wallet?
No, not a wallet. I think it would tend to be more an exchange for them to have an interface. So I'm picturing you go to startup21.com, whatever their site's going to be, and you have the ability to invest in companies at a small scale, at a big scale. You have the ability to buy and sell futures, to trade options, all the sorts of things that you can do now in a public stock market, I think still are a struggle for people because the infrastructure or the front-end interface hasn't been built. So I think once that's built, Bitcoin becomes a much more viable.
You're more or less talking about an ETF.
Yeah, an ETF. Really, you'd want to see you'd want to see it more like a brokerage, right? I want to see a Fidelity for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay. And Brian, your guess?
Well, I think it's a lot of what Mike is saying. There's a lot of feeling that this is going to be a massive API app platform, massive adoption under a lot of different scenarios. I see one of those scenarios being, quite frankly, like we've been talking about, person-to-person payments and the ability to move money quite efficiently. Now, they're also working, in my view, on ways to try to work within infrastructures within our country and some of the more developed Western countries to allay the fears that regulators have. The size of the investment and some of the background that I've heard leads me to believe that what they're leading with is going to be much more consumer facing to begin with than what their ultimate game plan is going to be. And whether that manifests as a wallet, as a payment system, it's anybody's guess. I got to say that no matter what we're guessing at, this is a very fluid environment. There's a lot of stuff going on around this. And when you throw that much money and so much talent into one space, it's going to do exceedingly well. I don't second guess at this stage what they're working on because of certainly some of the background information I've heard. It's quite impressive. How about you, Faisal? What's your view?
I don't know. It can't be a wallet. I mean, 116 million for a wallet. I don't know if they're raising 116 million for a wallet. I'd say the wallet would come with the 50 state licenses. That's the only thing I can think of. No, I could agree the ETF route. Yeah. The ability to buy fractional ownership of almost anything you can remotely think of: gold, commodities exchanges. You could buy the index, you could buy the FTSE 100, and buy $30 worth of FTSE 100, whatever it is. That would probably be the only thing. And the third, although it's not something that's clear in my mind, is they have either invested or owned or something of a payment network that is huge, or something I can't see a fathom. I don't know. Maybe they've gone with Discover and say, hey, Discover now does Bitcoin and Bitcoin does Discover.
It's funny. Just a quick interaction on this. The whole idea of the on-demand economy, the marketplace economy, we just spoke with Mike about how the challenge is related to buying and selling of units. Let's call it a parking space, somebody's car, time with an elderly person. Imagine if in fact they've built that. And again, I'm not saying they are, but let's imagine if you could just buy in and pay for and check out through this one blockchain type of API structure. It changes the entire on-demand ecosystem almost overnight. And it doesn't change it in a bad sense. It doesn't make it like, well, there's only one way to do this. It just makes the efficiency orders of magnitude higher. Imagine all the back-end work that doesn't need to be done when somebody is fractionalizing the ownership of their car or fractionalizing the ownership of their time. I'm giving 6 hours. Okay, just buying into it.
116 million says one thing. Whatever it is, it'll have the interest of the U.S. corporate sector very soon.
There's no doubt. And I think it's going to happen faster.
It's not a consumer product. It has access to U.S. corporate sector getting involved, doing whatever the hell they want to do with it. Pretty quick. It may have the consumer.
There's a consumer aspect to it. I can pretty much assure you that.
No, well, it's not going to be a totally consumer.
No.
That's what I'm saying.
No, it's not. It's not. Again, we're diluting it if we even talk about wallets or anything of that magnitude. We're talking about really the way we're rethinking how computerization is going to take place on a lot of different levels. And if in fact you can create this fractionalization on anything within a very large corporation and within a very small, community of like-minded individuals who are forming a marketplace. This is really where I see it being centered, but that is also self-limiting because your mind can only conceive what you can think of, right? So you could kind of say, what is it going to do? Well, you just use self-reference. But there's other things that are going to come from it. I think that's the thing that has really ignited the interest behind.
Yeah,
this
we'll see.
company.
I think 116 million speaks for itself. So there's got to be something bigger than a wallet. If it's just a wallet, we're going to end this podcast and just wrap up because if it's just a wallet, we're in some
we're off by a magnitude.
Yeah. All right, guys. This has been an awesome episode.
Absolutely.
Thank you all to the listeners, and I hope you all enjoyed.
Have a great one.
Thank you. Have a good one.
See you guys.
Bye.